Well, this is a video I never thought I'd film, but 77% of women with lipedema have ADHD. That is a huge statistic. And if we're willing to look at it, which I'm not a fan, but this is why it's a short video today, because I've only just started deep diving into this and facing my own demons, I guess, or my own downfall and my idiosyncrasies and all that sort of thing. You've got to be willing to face that when you're figuring out your health. Uh, I've delved into this area, which I had no idea was relevant to lipedema, hypermobility, MCAS, all that kind of thing. So let's get into it. So we've always been told or we've learned ourselves that things like brain fog and overwhelm and anxiety and all that kind of thing was hormone related or lipedema related, and rightly so from living with these things or inflammation in the brain and so on. What if they were also symptoms of ADHD? And this is a really interesting area to delve into. And I am definitely one of those people that over the years I've been like, it's got to be just heavy metals, or it's got to be, why have we got so many people with ADHD now and all this sort of thing. There's a very big reason for that, which we'll get to. And while from my perspective, I'm not running off to get a diagnosis for this, I definitely feel I can tick off a lot of symptoms of ADHD. I'm also in human design a manifesting generator, and we tend to squirrel, we tend to pivot on a dime and look at lots of different things as well. If you don't know what human design is, look it up and it will tell you all about that. So I like doing lots of different things. I've done lots of different things. Does that make me ADHD? I don't know. However, here's what I've learned so far. It's not much, and that's why it won't be a really long video, but it was enough that I wanted to share it with you so that I could start the ball rolling with a conversation. If anyone wants to share with me their experience, that would be amazing, because this is where I'm like, where do I even start here? Now, here's what I know. ADHD is genetic, like lipedema, right? Our child has ADHD, was diagnosed very young, at 10 or something like that. And so where did that come from? Don't think it came from my husband. My husband is pretty solid and like in so much as, very practical, very like I just there's no symptomology for him for ADHD. Me, on the other hand, yes, I'm all over the place. But here's the thing, I still get things done. So this is where I understand now with the few, YouTube videos that I've watched and a little bit of digging, is that there can be up to 7 different types. And this comes from a doctor that can be quite controversial, but generally the controversy is in place before the science catches up. And he says, like, so mainstream says there's 3 different kinds of ADHD. I don't know. This is how new I am to this. I don't even know what they are. But this other doctor says there's actually 7 different kinds from his perspective, and he's scanned 40,000 brains. So I'm going to say he's fairly legit. I wouldn't call him too controversial if he's scanned 40,000 brains. He's a psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm not sure which one. And he also lives in a family, the wife, the kids, and so he's experienced it himself in watching it. He doesn't have it. But he says there's 7 different kinds. And so that it depends on what part of the brain is affected as to which kind you have. And some kinds, are the traditional, what we see in young children, no resistance, hyperactive, no thought processes of outcomes, doesn't learn from mistakes, can't sit still, this kind of thing. Then you've got high functioning women, adults that are CEOs and this kind of thing, holding down jobs and careers and entrepreneurs with $1 million businesses, also with ADHD, right? So there's all different kinds. So I think we're new enough into the world of ADHD that we all consider it's just that picture of the child that can't sit still and, runs around the house, hyperactive and that kind of thing. And it's really nothing like that anymore. And that's why women in their 40s and 50s are getting diagnosed in their droves. Would I get diagnosed? Probably not, because I'm holding down a job. I've published 7 books. I work, quite adequately. I get things done. I do get overwhelmed very easily if I've got too much coming at me work-wise and I have to stop and sort of like separate it all. That can happen for sure. But unless I thought, and this is how I always speak about diagnosis of any kind for any reason, unless there's a reason for me to have a diagnosis, like would medication help me navigate my life better, then I'm not interested in a diagnosis or having that on my rap sheet for, health insurance purposes. So, at this stage, my life, I'm holding things down well. I'm achieving more than I thought I would at this point. We've ticked off goals, we've moved to Thailand. There's like so many things I'm ticking off that I'm like, oh, is this necessary to go on some form of medication to make life better? Could life be better? Of course, like who knows? You don't know what you don't know, right? So there's a possibility, but it's not something that I would chase down unless I thought I could improve my life in some way. So if I suffered from anxiety a lot or social anxiety and sensory issues and couldn't go out in public and things like that, then potentially, yeah, I would go and chase a diagnosis. But none of that sort of like this has been like such a surprise to me that potentially this is something I carry, and this is something that, because it's a genetic issue, it's something that I've passed on to my child. Um, but because I'm handling my life and I don't like, because it's a surprise, I just don't feel like I need to chase that up at this point. Who knows how things might change, right? So for me, how is it all connected, right? So how is lipedema, muscle activation syndrome, ADHD, all of these things, are they connected? And that's what I seem to be finding across the board without fail. These all come under this big umbrella of inflammation. Inflammation in the connective tissue, and more specifically, interleukin 6 as the inflammatory mediator. So I have not gone down that rabbit hole yet because I suspect that's going to be a big one and I've got to be prepared for it. So that's where I've gotten to so far. And as somebody who has more than one inflammatory disease, so thyroid disease is an inflammatory disease, and lipedema is an inflammatory disease, and I'm going to say hypermobility is an inflammatory disease, and I'm going to say muscle activation syndrome is an inflammatory disease. What have we got going on? Just a whole bunch of inflammation that's causing the misfiring of everything else in our body. So that's kind of where I'm at with the ADHD thing. And I will use an example of this. When our child was diagnosed, for a few years, medication was at play for sure. But after that, we went to a doctor that recommended a detox of aluminium and all this sort of thing. And for a while, medication was not needed, right? And I think that's because we removed everything in his brain that was causing inflammation. So now I can look back and go, oh, now why this gets missed as a diagnosis and why we seem to separate it is simply because the symptoms can cross over into each area. So that's why you just sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, brain fog or anxiety and all this sort of thing can be a thyroid issue, can be, so it gets missed as a side thing. It's only because we've got social media now and everybody's watching everybody else, and because all these one woman gets diagnosed and goes and says, oh my goodness, I had no clue. Then the next woman goes, oh, maybe that's me. And look, diagnosis isn't necessarily just for if you want medication or anything. Sometimes it's a justification. Sometimes it's a validation that, oh, now I get me. And that's okay too, right? If you want that diagnosis just for that self-validation of, now I get why depending on what type you are, why I could never finish XYZ, or why I start so many new things, or why I'm always hunting for the next dopamine hit. And, all these different reasons. If that's your reason for a diagnosis, is that validation, you get one, right? So I don't need that validation, because I'm still quite happy with all the things I've ever done in my life. And I know there's still a million things I want to do. And to me, that's okay. And it hasn't changed my life. In fact, it's probably allowed me to dream a little bit bigger than I normally would have, I guess, if I didn't think this way. Because for me, I have this process of, sure, why not? Why can't we do it? I mean, we moved from Australia to Thailand, to Bangkok. And we were walking the other day, and one of our bucket list items is to go and watch the Tour de France live. And my husband's like, oh, yeah, 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 but we'll need to, oh, that's a big, I'm like, no, 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 it's not that big. We moved countries to live. So taking a holiday is really not such a big thing to have to cope with mentally. It's just saving a certain amount of money, looking into the tool, all this sort of things. So maybe ADHD has got some great things about it where it allows you to dream bigger and chase after your things, because there's maybe not that space of somebody, or that self-talk of, that's not very sensible, right? I don't know. I don't know enough about it. So if you know more about it, talk to me. So again, ADHD, hypermobility, lipedema, MCAS, they're all treated as separate things. So that's clearly why things get missed. And it's, often I'm going to say, from what I've seen online of the people that I follow that have been women in my age group getting diagnosed, it's because they've come across it in another way, someplace else, not necessarily related to whatever symptoms they've got going on from a physical perspective, but they've, watched somebody else talk about it and then gone, oh, hang on a sec. So very interesting. That's as much as I know about it. So I'm just going to quickly cover, though, the seven types and it's Dr. Amen, Daniel Amen, this guy that I found a few. So I've started watching adult ADHD videos and interviews to sort of get a gist of what's happening here. Doesn't mean to say I'm going to get myself diagnosed, just means I want to know what I can do for myself from a natural perspective. I'm not against medicine at all. God, I've had all the surgeries, right? I am not against medicine. I'm all for it. But there are some things that, medicine can't do much about. And you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. So I've got the list of the seven types in front of me. So I'm going to read them. There's classic ADD, inattentive ADD, over-focused ADD, temporal lobe ADD, limbic ADD, ring of fire ADD, and anxious ADD, each with distinct experiences, symptoms, challenges, and treatments. So he's an interesting one, and I will continue to learn what his thoughts are around this so that I can understand where maybe I fit into these. But he's also the one that talks about a elimination diet that has reduced. It's on my phone. This sounds like it's probably very ADHD. It is. Let me have a look. The things that help the most, and I'm going to say he said in one interview that I saw that it reduced symptoms by really high amount, like 70% or something like that. And in some cases reversed the symptoms. You probably don't fully reverse it. The minute you get inflammation again, they come back. But these are the things that move the dial the most when it comes to symptomology with ADHD. A digital detox. I live on the computer. I work on the computer. We're always on the computer. I'm always on my phone or the computer. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, having said that. So with my other business, Thyroid School, a lot of that's on scheduling, so I don't have to put my head in there all the time. So I don't do a lot of that. Maybe in the evenings for an hour or so, I might have a scroll. And if, I'm sitting around waiting somewhere for an appointment or whatever, perhaps, but for the rest of the time, it's purely work for me on the computer. So I don't know if there's a distinction when he says having a digital detox. So anyway, that was interesting. But when it comes to food, he says remove gluten, dairy, corn, soy, artificial dyes and artificial sweeteners. So he said they've done trials on this, and that's made the world of difference. So um, I could try that for myself, see if that makes any difference to anything in my day to day. I'm always up for a trial, that. I'm always up for a challenge. So that would be an interesting challenge to do over 30 days for those foods. I can't do the digital detox because I can't work then. I need to work. Um, so that would be an interesting challenge to run to see if it makes any difference to, I guess, my brain fog or memory or, finding words for things. Because there are times that I'm like, I know what I want to say, and I'm not sure if this is an ADHD thing, but, there are often times I like to write things down because then I can figure out what I truly want to say because the words don't actually come to me in the moment. So I'm not good at like suddenly, debating something with somebody else. Although I'm a support coach when it comes to emotions, right? So emotional healing and emotional coaching, and the right words always find me there. But maybe it's because I'm talking about emotions and feelings and that kind of thing, and not so much talking about day to day, logistics of things. I'm not sure. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But that's where I'm at, and it's a very precursory video, and I clearly have to do more research. But I really just wanted to throw it out there because I'm hoping some of you guys will come back and share with me your experience. If you have lipedema, ADHD, and potentially any of the other side inflammatory things that seem to be all connected. Again, this is about inflammation in the brain, and removing those things that I just listed off, the gluten, the soy, the dairy. That's removing inflammatory items that could be causing these issues. That's probably why those things are removed. We don't realize how much artificial dyes and artificial sweeteners and things like that, the chemicals, can inflame our body. And in fact, I was talking to somebody recently, a coaching client, and her daughter is on the spectrum and she had lipedema and these sorts of issues. And I said to her, don't worry about a particular diet right now. The best thing you can probably do for yourself is cook from scratch. That's the starting point. Because if you live off processed foods, then you're going to have the artificial sweetness and the artificial dyes like up to here. So that would be the starting point to me if you already live off a processed diet or a busy woman's diet, where everything's in packets in the freezer and pre-made, pre-purchased. No shade, right? We do what we have to do. But if it's affecting our brain and how we function and our inflammatory markers in our body, then it's a problem. So this morning we just went up and had our wellness checks. We, factored into our budget when we moved to Bangkok that we will have once a year the wellness checks that you can get here with the medical tourism, which are amazing through the roof. So we've got like a list this long of blood tests that we had done, a urine sample, stool sample, and she had to take, the poor love, 6 vials of blood out of out of me, which is not easy for me. I've got horrible veins for pulling blood out, but she nailed it first go. And she put the smallest needle in and she just sat there patiently tapping on the thing, and we got 6 vials of blood. Insane. And in 2 days' time, I will have all the results emailed to me. And as a naturopath and clinical nutritionist, I know enough about reading results that I can then go, oh, we need to go see someone, or, oh, no, it's okay, we're tracking all right. So having these blood tests done is just a really good way of tracking inflammation in the body, because one of the things I added to they have packages, so we just sort of kind of picked one package and then I added 3 or 4 extras onto it, so homocysteine, and so seeing how much buildup of histamines there are in the body that's not being chased out properly, not being evacuated from our body. So that's one that I added, and HSCRP, so that tells us how inflamed our body is. So it's going to be a matter of tracking that for everything that's going on, and everything that has to do with this seems to be this group of symptoms that are lumped together that I had no idea they were together. It's about watching the inflammation in the body. So, in between learning about all this, there's just going to be more inflammation chats and talks and slideshows, because that's what we've just got to consistently do, as boring as it is. And as like, yeah, but that's no fun when it comes to food. It's I'm going to say it's going to be the thing that moves the dial for everything, right? I've always said you can't heal one thing without healing the other. Like when you can't spot heal something. So you can't sort of go, I'm just going to heal the bursitis here in my shoulder, right? The inflammation there. Because if you're going to address the inflammation here, you're going to address the inflammation everywhere. So it's going to be about inflammation for all of us, and what causes the inflammation, what we can do to reduce the inflammation. That's got to be our life, I reckon, regardless of whether we've got ADHD, MCAS, hypermobility, lipedema, thyroid disease, and the list goes on, right? Regardless of all that, inflammation is what we have to focus on.